Om Jnanatirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
We'll continue our discussion on Grhastha life in Krishna consciousness. Yesterday we discussed who should get married.
We'll start off today by discussing how one should go about getting married. Now those who are already married will think, well, it doesn't have anything to do with me. But actually it does, because you have to see in future your children how they will also get married. Also give guidance to others, other young people. This is a very important function of elderly people in all traditional societies throughout the world, particularly in Indian culture or Vedic culture, that elderly people, due to their experience and the wisdom which they have hopefully gathered throughout the years, are able to give advice to others. Because in youth, people tend to be rather brash or immature in their activities. They tend to act without thinking very carefully about it. That's why in the Vedic system, and in any, as I say, any traditional culture throughout the world, that young people, they would be guided by older people. Nowadays, of course, old and young, everyone is again, no knowledge. They think that to gratify the senses is the only goal of life. So such people do not become more wise as they become older, they simply become more foolish. So we are hoping that Grhasthas in Krishna consciousness, as they grow older, they will have many realizations, and they will be able to guide younger people through the difficult stages of household life. Because there are so many problems. Of course, this is mentioned throughout the scriptures that family life is full of problems. In Bhagavatam, Lord Kapila-Dev says that household life is full of diplomacy and politics. So of course, Krishna conscious family life is not meant to be like that. It is supposed to be ideal. But the nature of this world is that even though you may have an ideal, what is the practical reality doesn't usually come up to the ideal standard. There is always a gap between the ideal and the reality. And usually people, before they get married, they are dreaming that everything will be very wonderful. But they find out shortly after getting married that it's not as wonderful as they might have thought it would be. There is this phenomenon called falling in love, in which a young man and a young woman, by the power of Maya, feel very much attracted towards each other. And they get into a complete illusion that life, the whole of their life is dependent upon the good wishes of the other person. But they get into a big illusion that their whole life becomes centered on the good wishes of that other person. So as I say, this is the power of Maya. It's actually the attraction of lust. So after they join together in marriage, they find that Maya acts in a different way. And although their husband or wife previously appeared to be like a demigod from heaven in their behavior, but they find when they actually live with them that their behavior changes. And they find that married life isn't as sweet as they thought it would be. So that's why elderly people, they can give good advice. Those who are elderly, mature Grhasthas can give good advice to young Grhasthas to help guide them through the inevitable problems. Now, we're talking a little bit about this thing of falling in love. Now, the traditional Indian system or Vedic system is not that a young man and a young woman meet and they fall in love and then they get married. There are still many people I have met in India who they never met each other before they were married. They met each other first time and they're married on their wedding day. Their marriage is arranged by their parents. Now in the Western countries they think this is something very strange. How can you get married to someone you don't even know? You have the idea you should live with each other and be with each other for some time, then you can get to know each other, then you can see if you like each other, then you should get married. And I think it's a very cruel system that people should be forced to get married without any choice of nothing. But actually we see that Indian families and Indian marriages are much better than in the West, going by statistics at least. Because divorce is, or was, unknown in India, at least among the Hindus and among the Muslims. That's why you'll find in any Indian language there is no word for divorce. They had invented one word from Sanskrit, they made one word up from Sanskrit word, Vivaha Viched, which means breaking the marriage. But you won't find that in original Sanskrit. Or the commonly used word is talaq, which is an Urdu word brought by the Muslims. But in the original Vedic culture, there's no thought even of divorce. And even now, most people who get married in India, they're not even considering that there is any possibility of divorce. Even in the Western countries, it wasn't allowed. It was introduced, and now it's thought to be a very normal thing. But actually, it means that the family is destroyed. It becomes a very unhappy situation. So anyway, we'll talk more about that later. But the point I'm making is that even though people say that this Indian system of marriage is very bad, going by observation is actually much better. And my personal observation is that family life is much happier, more stable, more steady in India than in the Western countries. Now, of course, India is imitating the Western countries, and they're importing all Western ideas, and the whole society is going to hell. But still, the original culture is going on to some extent. So there are many good things we can learn from them. Now, the original Indian system of marriage is that the boy and the girl, they should be married very young. Prabhupada was saying that, I think it was his mother-in-law, she was married at the age when she was 4 years old. And her husband was 8 years old at the time. Now, that doesn't mean that they start living together. That comes later when they're a little grown up. But Prabhupada explained why this was done, that before reaching puberty, they should be married. Because as soon as puberty is reached, young people have very strong desires. So if the girl and the boy know that already my husband or wife is fixed up, then they're peaceful in their mind. Otherwise they become very agitated, the mind becomes very disturbed. And we actually find that in the schools and in the playgrounds, that the boys and girls, their mind is just absorbed in the opposite sex. And they're just looking at each other and agitating each other. So the Vedic system recommends early marriage. Nowadays in India, that's all changed. Still in the villages, you find people married young. But the middle class people, they all go for education and they don't get married until late. The middle class people, they go for higher education and they often don't get married until late. But still there are many child marriages, the children are just very young. Even though it's officially illegal, but no one stops it. Now there's a whole science of how this should be done. The boy's father and the girl, when the man has a son who is of an eligible age, or another family has a girl of eligible age, they will start to look for a suitable family. Especially parents of the young girls, it is their particular duty to find out a suitable husband for the girl. That the father has a responsibility particularly to look after the girl. And they'll seek out some family with a suitable partner. Seek out means they may ask their relatives, do you know any suitable family? Or there are some people who their profession is ghata, they arrange marriages. So a suitable family means they should be of the same caste, which is not a consideration in this country. But more or less they should be from a similar background. I know in Bangladesh, near to us, we were renting a house in Dhaka, the capital city. So the house we rented was in a Christian area. So even though they were Christians, they were converted some generations back from Hinduism, and the culture they followed mostly all the same as Hinduism. So we heard that some of our neighbors, they had been offered their daughter the chance to marry a boy from a very rich family. our neighbors, they've been given a proposition that your daughter, she should marry into a very rich family. But they had refused because they thought that the girl herself, the daughter, and they also, they would be very uncomfortable with the members of the other family because the boy's family was very rich and their family was only middle class. So they thought there'd be too much difference and it would be embarrassing. So there are so many considerations. For instance, if the husband is well educated, it would generally be better if his wife is also well educated. Particularly the girl should not be superior to the husband in any way. That she should be younger, she should not be more educated or from a richer family, because it's necessary psychologically that the boy feels superiority. And they should have similar nature. As Prabhupada notes in one of his purports, that if the boy is a devotee and the girl is a devotee, the marriage will be very happy. And similarly, if the boy is of demoniac nature and the girl is of demoniac nature, they will be happy in their marriage also. Happy demons. So, they should see what is the mentality. Then apart from all these considerations, one most important thing is the astrological chart, which will, by astrological calculations, they will calculate if the boy and the girl are compatible. That means if the stars, if there are no contrary stars, now there's no such thing as 100% compatibility, but if it's 75%, that's enough. But if there's too much incompatibility, then even if everything else is very good, the families are agreed, they're from the same kind of background, everything, they won't go ahead with the marriage. I know several young men who have been waiting for some years, because more than one young man have been waiting for several years, because whatever girl is found suitable for them by their parents, somehow or other the charts don't match. Now, whether or not we should use astrology for devotees has been a point of discussion in our society, because Prabhupada in his purport talked about the usefulness of astrology. But then in his personal dealings, he usually discouraged devotees from listening to astrologers. So my understanding of this is as follows, that those who have surrendered to Krishna, they are fully dependent on Krishna. So whatever happens to them in future, they simply depend on Krishna. Therefore, they have no need to visit astrologers. But someone who's going to get married, anyway, they're already making some material adjustment. In almost all cases, they're getting married because they have some material desire which they have to fulfill. So they want to dovetail that in Krishna consciousness by getting married to a devotee. But still, because anyway they're dealing in some material activities, for them it would be wise to take astrological advice. Now the problem with this is finding a good astrologer. Because just like Ayurveda is a good science, but it's difficult to find a really good Ayurvedic doctor. So in the same way, Jyotish or astrology, that is a good science, but it's difficult to find a good astrologer. Because it is a very subtle science. It doesn't depend only upon mathematical calculations. The astrologer, even after seeing all the calculations, he has to have some insight into the personalities he's dealing with. And as far as I've seen, it's Indian astrologers, they're not much adapted to the workings of the Western mind. And Western devotees who take up astrology, these, particularly in this point of matching personalities, it's a very subtle point. So I've also seen they're not particularly expert. I know one friend of mine, devotee, he was proposing to get married. And a Western devotee, an astrologer, he compared their charts. And he found 98% compatibility, which sounds practically impossible anyway. But anyway, you would have expected that they would have been very suitable partners. But they weren't at all. They were very much mismatched. Although theoretically, astrology can be helpful, and I've seen among Indian people it is useful, I'm a little skeptical about the use of astrology among Westerners and Western devotees. In other words, although it's considered the most important factor in arranging marriages in India, it may not be such an important factor among Westerners. Now, we've been talking about how people go about getting married in India. So we may think, what relevance has it got to us here, where the society is so different, the culture is so different? Well, of course, Srila Prabhupada, he wanted to establish Vedic culture all over the world. Vedic culture means Varnashram culture, and the real essence of Vedic culture is, of course, Krishna consciousness. So that is our aim. So we should know what are the workings of that culture. Although we may not be able to follow it in all its details, as much as possible we should try to follow it. Nowadays, of course, in India, the culture is under attack from the forces of Kali Yuga. But still, most people have their marriages arranged. And it's very interesting to note that those people who don't get their marriages arranged, in India they're called love marriages. They just, two people fall in love and they decide to get married without having it arranged by their parents. So it's very interesting to note that most love marriages, they're a complete disaster. So anyway, what has this got to do with ISKCON in Russia? Well, of course, although we don't have the full-fledged Vedic Varnashram culture here, still, there are many things we can learn. This point of arranging marriages, I would suggest that would be something very helpful. Otherwise, what goes on is not very proper. That means someone thinks, I want to get married. So he or she goes hunting. They go searching out some eligible partner. This is not very good. This creates the wrong kind of atmosphere in our centers. So what is better is, one should be able to approach his temple authorities or some senior Grhasthas and tell them that I want to get married. And different gurus, some gurus they will want to be informed, and others they may not be very interested in this at all. So the point is that there should be some senior people who we can look to for advice. Now generally temple presidents don't want anybody to get married because it means most times they lose some of the services of some devotees. So they may well preach, don't get married, which is not bad advice, because as we were discussing yesterday, after all, marriage is in so many headaches, so if you can avoid it, better. But as we also discussed, one should make a decision and act upon that maturely. So what should happen is that there should be someone who you can turn to. There is a senior devotee. And it's a good idea for devotees when of course we're talking mostly about younger people now, when they join the movement to, even if they're not thinking about getting married, to take advice from some senior devotees. Some devotees think I can only take advice from my guru. But that's not what our Shastras tell us, nor is it traditional Vaishnava culture. There should be so many people to help us, because after all, most ISKCON gurus are traveling a lot, and they may have so many disciples, and they may that personal minute or day by day guidance that is more practical if some other senior devotee can help you with it. Of course, it may not be that we need so much attention. Anyone who's a little serious and cool-headed or mature, they don't need to be told what to do every 1 second of the day. Krishna consciousness is a very simple and straightforward process, and it's not that we should always have, oh, I have this problem, I have that problem. Someone who always has so many problems means they're very weak. But of course there are weak devotees also, not everyone is very advanced devotee. But anyway, the general point is that we should look for some mature devotees to give us some advice. Especially if we're talking about young people who are thinking about getting married. It means that it's a very delicate situation in their lives. It's a very crucial time, and then the mind may be agitated in so many ways with so many fears and doubts. So it's good to have some guidance. That I was saying at the beginning of the lecture yesterday, that actually there should be so many household of Brahmins who can give advice to others. Sannyasi shouldn't have to speak about all these things actually. He should only speak about philosophy of Krishna consciousness, not have to get involved in all these social matters. But because our society is a new society, and we don't have very many senior, mature Grhasthas, therefore someone has to give some guidance on this. But anyway, we hope that gradually senior, mature Grhasthas, there'll be more of them, and they can help the younger devotees as they come up. One thing else about life in India is that, especially in the villages, there's a very intimate relationship between all the different people in the village. People from different families, because they're all living together in the same small village, they have a very intimate relationship with each other. So that the children from their small age, they address any older person as uncle or auntie. So that kind of atmosphere would be this we want to make in our ISKCON also, where all the devotees, they have a very nice, trusting relationship with each other, so that even if there are 100 devotees in the temple or whatever, you feel a junior devotee feels he can go to a senior devotee and get good guidance. Prabhupada actually said that our temples, they should be like a big family. He said the president should be like the father to all the devotees, and the president's wife should be like the mother. So this is what should go on in ISKCON, especially here. Our movement is very new, but we would request those who are older to help those who are junior. Even sometimes some devotees, they may be physically older, and some devotees who are physically younger, they may be more years in the movement. But still, those who are old, whose bodies are older, they have more experience of practical life. So for this kind of thing, they may be able to give advice. Anyway, the general point I'd like to make is that it's better if someone who wants to get right, they should approach some senior devotees, such as town president or any senior Grhastha.
Or maybe his guru, if his guru does this kind of thing, and ask if they could help, maybe they could arrange marriage. Some gurus get involved in the marriage of their disciples and others don't.
Traditionally, sannyasis didn't, but Prabhupada did. Once I heard on a tape conversation Prabhupada say something. He said that the young girls in our society, they should be trained in two things. He said one is chastity, they should be trained to be very faithful to their husband. Another thing is cooking. They should become first-class cooks. So Prabhupada said if any girl is trained up like this, I will personally arrange a first-class husband for them. So one other thing I would suggest before getting married, one other thing that would be very useful is to spend a little time in India, if possible. It's not possible for everybody, but those who do get the possibility, they can take advantage of it. By spending time in India, I mean traveling from place to place, preaching. Because if you do that in India, you automatically get invited to stay in people's houses. And you'll see how people live, how family life goes on in India. Because even today, most Indian families, it's a good model for the rest of the world to follow. Now, we'll move on to the next point. With what attitude should there be within marriage? Now, so many times you see people, they want to get married because their mind is very agitated by lust. So that's one good reason to get married, because lust should be satisfied within marriage. But we should know that although marriage is a license for sense gratification, its main purpose is to help us in spiritual advancement. Its main purpose is to help in our spiritual advancement, because it's understood that in youth people have very strong desires. So one is allowed to dovetail those desires within marriage. So that there are different points, but one point is that by dovetailing that sense gratification propensity, then he won't engage in sinful activities by engaging in sense gratification outside of marriage. So that he doesn't have to fall down completely away from spiritual life, he can have a little sense gratification and at the same time go on with his spiritual progress. So marriage doesn't only mean sense gratification, it means responsibility. Man and woman combine with a sense of responsibility to cooperate with each other and help each other materially and spiritually. Now nowadays, marriage is mostly entered into just on the basis of sense gratification. That is predicted in the Srimad Bhagavatam as one of the symptoms of Kali Yuga. Dambhati bhiruchi hetu. People just out of lust, because a man feels attracted to a woman feels attracted to a man, so they get married. Because they superficially like each other. But the nature of material attraction is that I like you one day, I don't like you the next. So if it's just on some very superficial basis that I like you, then tomorrow I don't like you and then finish. So those who are entering marriage or those who are married should know that they have a very great responsibility. One responsibility is to show the world that Krishna consciousness means happy in this life, happy in the next. Once Prabhupada was arranging a marriage ceremony, he said that may you be happy in this life and happy in the next. However, after some time, Prabhupada stopped arranging the marriage of his disciple because he saw that even though he had given all directions by which husband and wife could live happily, that so many of them, they were not living very happily together. Someone asked yesterday after the Bhagavatam class that I was saying if there are so many divorces in society, that is the sign of a sick society. So there are many divorces in ISKCON also, so what does that mean? So the answer is very clear. It means that at least in the Grhastha ashram, it's not very healthy in our society. At least in the Western countries, there have been many cases of divorce. This is not good at all. This is not at all what Srila Prabhupada wanted. He gave so many instructions in his books about household life. Now, unless this is rectified, I don't see how our movement can really become very strong. Because most people get married. So if they get married and then again divorced, it's not going to impress anybody. In the world today, there are so many social problems. One of them, one major one, is that in the Western countries especially, there is no proper family life. That because there's no commitment for the husband, there's no deep commitment for the husband and wife to stay together. So after some time, they just split. And even the parents don't care so much for the children. They just stick them in front of the TV. Watch the TV. Don't bother me. Their whole attitude is completely wrong. Because the Western world, now the whole world, the whole attitude towards life is simply selfish. Simply based on sense gratification. If I will be happy, that will be the goal of my life. It doesn't matter what happens to anybody else. They don't care about giving pain to others. Even their own children, they don't care about giving pain to them. The children look up to the parents for guidance. But if the parents are selfish and they simply fight and then they divorce, not caring for the children, then the children will be very bitter. Which is one reason why we find so many child criminals in the Western country, so much child alcoholism, drug abuse, so many child suicides. Simply because their parents are selfish and they don't care what happens to the children. They even get married with the attitude, let me try and see. Alright, I'll get married, and if I don't like it, I'll kick my wife out in the street. Or the girl is getting married and she's thinking, let me try and see. And if I don't like this guy, I can always find a new boyfriend. So this is a completely wrong mentality. One should get married for the sake of spiritual advancement. That means he should see everything in perspective. That anyway, I'm not going to live very long. I could die anytime. But even if I live to be 70 or 80 years old, it's not very long. So anyway, I'm getting married. So let me, in this situation, do what is best for my spiritual advancement. Even if there are difficulties within family life, we have to tolerate them. We may think I'll get divorced and try again. That is the trick of Maya. Maya always makes us think that I'll just change my position a little bit and then everything will be very nice. The example is given in the Bhagavatam that a man is carrying a heavy load on one shoulder. It's giving him a lot of pain. So then he very intelligently thinks of a solution. He moves the load to the other shoulder. So actually it's not a solution at all. Instead of suffering on this side, he's suffering on that side. So in the same way, whatever material adjustment we make, instead of suffering or being disturbed in one way, we'll be suffering or disturbed in another way. In English, there's a saying that the grass is always greener on the other side. This saying comes from the grazing of cows. In England, they have many fields for grazing cows, and they have wooden fences. They have wooden fences to stop the cows going outside the field. The fence is always big enough so the cow can put only his head through to the next field. So you'll find in the field, there are so many cows, and none of them eat the grass inside the field. They all put their head through the fence and eat the grass in the next field. This is cows in Maya. They think that if it's the next field, it must be better than this field. So we're also cows in Maya. Just like a brahmachari is thinking, if I was a Grhastha, it would be very nice. And a Grhastha was thinking, well, I should have stayed brahmachari, it would have been very nice. Dilika ladhu jo kaya jo bistaya, jo na kaya wo bhi pastaya. This saying is there. One who has tasted dili ladhu, he is lamenting. He is lamenting, I tasted it once, but now I cannot get it. And one who never tasted it, he's thinking, I never got the chance to taste it. So either way, people are lamenting. So Grhastha may be thinking, I married, but actually, I shouldn't have married this. I should have got married to somebody else. But as the Bhagavan teaches us, tasyaiva hito payato paiteta kovido nalabhyate yat ramatam upriyadha, that whatever happiness you are destined to get, you're going to get it. And whatever distress you're destined to get, you're also going to get it. So, one should accept whatever position he's in, and whatever position he's in, go on with this Krishna consciousness. This idea that, just a few days ago, I was in Orenburg. So, one couple came up to me, married couple with a young daughter, 5 years old, devotees, asking for blessings for divorce. Because they said, we got married before we became devotees, but we got married for sense gratification, and actually we don't like each other. So we'd like to get divorced. So I told them, no blessing. You're in this situation, you have a daughter, you just can't whimsically get divorced. Now you should accept this responsibility, and even though you may not be so much matched to each other, anyway you're not going to live very long. So somehow or other make some adjustment and go on with your Krishna consciousness. Because one thing is, divorce means so much emotional disturbance. It's very disturbing for the children especially. And these are young people. It means they're not going to live a renounced life. If they got divorced, they'd again be looking for another partner. So this will set a very bad example. That in Krishna consciousness, so people, they just get married, they don't like it. Then if you're so frivolous and whimsical, then again you may get married, and then again you may have another 1 or 2 children, and then you may think, I don't like this person, I'll just get divorced again. So in this way you go through 5 or 6 husbands or 5 or 6 wives, always looking for the perfect situation, the perfect husband, the perfect wife. Well, you won't ever get the perfect husband. The ideal husband is Krishna. So if you want, you can marry him. You have to be qualified enough to do that. Rukmini, she can marry Krishna. But unless you're on the level of Rukmini, you'd better accept someone else as the representative of Krishna. So sometimes we hear devotees saying, we're trying to make our marriage work. What? It's a Western, and the way they say, sometimes you hear them say, we're trying to make our marriage work. We're trying to make our marriage successful. Now, if you try to make your marriage successful, it will never be successful. Because there'll always be so many problems, and you may think there's too many problems, alright, forget the marriage. So we shouldn't even think of trying to make our marriage successful. Because if we think that we're trying to make it successful, that means we've already given allowance for our attempt to fail. The real attitude should be that anyway, whatever happens, we're going to stay together. In Christianity, they have, at least in the Catholic Church, when they get married, they make a vow that we agree to stay together, husband and wife, in sickness or health, in poverty or wealth, in any condition. So if that kind of commitment is made, then the marriage will be successful. But if you try to make it successful by adjusting your different mentalities on the mental platform, then it will never be successful. But if there's a commitment to stay together, then somehow or other husband and wife will adjust. And even though they may sometimes disagree or even fight with each other, they'll never separate. Because they've made that commitment. So this commitment and responsibility in marriage is the key. That is the key to successful marriages. Now the next point is something that I really shouldn't talk about, being a sannyasi. But if you're going to talk about married life, it's very difficult not to talk about it. So at least I should discuss it to some extent, although I don't want to discuss it in detail. This point is sex. Grihamedi life means it is centered on sex. Yan maitunadi grihamedi sukham hitucham. Bhagavatam says that grihamedi life is centered on the very insignificant pleasure of sex life. And Grhastha life means it is centered on Krishna. These are two nomenclatures for householders, Grihamedi and Grhastha. Grihamedi means materialistic householder, and Grhastha means spiritualistic householder. Now it's understood when a man and woman unite in marriage that there will be sex. They don't get married to live together as brahmachari and brahmacharini. If they wanted to stay brahmachari and brahmacharini, they wouldn't get married in the first place. Of course, Grihastas who regulate their sex, or householders who regulate their sex life, they're called Grihastha brahmacharis. But unfortunately, too many of our devotees, after getting married, they become more like Grihamedis than Grihasthas. So that's why I said before that even if you want to get married, it's better to spend some time being trained as a brahmachari or brahmacharini. In this way, become a little strong. Of course, previously there were no brahmacharinis. Girls, they lived at home until they were old enough to live with their husband. But they would be trained in the principles of pious womanhood in the home by their mother, their grandmother, their aunties, and all this. They would hear the stories of great chaste women such as Sita Devi, Mandodari, then Gandhari, Draupadi. So by hearing these stories, they would model their lives on these great women. Of course, Savitri, of course. And in this way their character would be formed. Anyway, the point we're making is that about sex within marriage. Well, sex, according to religious principles, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that is representative of him. Dharmo viruddho bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava. He says that sex life which is not contrary to the principles of religion, that is me. So although illicit sex is so much condemned, sex for the purpose of producing ideal God-conscious children is very good. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that if I could produce God-conscious children, I would be ready to have sex 100 times. Still, Prabhupada noted, he didn't actually engage in sex. But the point is that tendency to seek heavenly pleasure, as Prabhupada called it in one purport, that should be used for the purpose of propagating children. As Prabhupada said once, that householders are also required. Prabhupada said householders are also required. Otherwise, where are the saintly persons going to come from? They're not going to drop from the sky. So, ideal devotees, man and wife, should join together for the purpose of propagating ideal children. The consciousness of the parents at the time of uniting dictates or influences which kind of child will enter the womb. Karmana daiva netrena jantur deho papatye. In Bhagavatam, Lord Kapila describes that a living entity gets his birth according to his previous karma and according to the supervision of God and the demigods. So that daiva netra, that the control of, or the vision of God and the demigods, if they see that husband and wife, they're from a very good they're very pure, and they're uniting for the sake of having a very good child, they will send a very good child to the womb. But even if the parents are devotees, if they unite simply out of lust, they will get a lusty child. Now the Vedic standard is that before uniting husband and wife, they should select a suitable time by consulting brahmanas. Suitable time means astrologically suitable. And they would go through a whole complex Vedic ceremony to purify their minds and request Lord Vishnu to send a very first-class child. Srila Prabhupada, he didn't prescribe the Vedic Garbhadhan Sanskar. But he told that householders, before uniting, they should chant at least 50 rounds. This has at least two effects. One thing is, it it puts a check on casual sex. Casual sex means they just, without any planning, just out of lust, like cats and dogs, they unite. So that is checked because they have to plan in advance. And another thing is that by chanting so many rounds, their mind will be purified. If husband and wife unite like cats and dogs, even within marriage, that is considered illicit sex. It is not as serious as illicit sex with outside of marriage, but still it is not the proper standard. So sex life within marriage should be for the purpose of propagating children. That means that these sex should be indulged in just after the menstrual period of the woman, because at that time, if the husband is potent, the husband and wife are both potent, then there must be a child formed. So then after one union, the pregnancy will take place. Then until the child is born, again they should not have sex, because the purpose of sex has already been fulfilled. And for at least 6 months after the child is born, again the husband should not impregnate his wife, because that will be too much strain on the woman to have one child after another too quickly. So that gives you once every 15 months. Once every 9 plus 6 months, 15 months. So when Prabhupada first told this, one of the devotees laughed and said, then why get married at all? If you want to get married for sex, but you can only do it once every 15 months, then what's the point? Prabhupada said, very intelligent, better not get married at all. Practically speaking, we see that even devotees who know the philosophy after they get married, they don't follow these rules very strictly. Often newly married devotees, they go through a period of complete maya. Of maya. Often newly married devotees, they go through a period of complete maya for some time, where they feel very much attracted to each other's bodies. Anyway, after some time, the attraction wears off, to some extent. Although when husband and wife unite, then the attraction between them becomes very strong and fixed. But usually when people first get married, in the beginning, that maya is extremely strong. They feel so much attracted to each other. So the proper standard is like that, sex only for children. Not all householders in us can follow, which is not good. But one thing we may note is that Prabhupada, he didn't probe into the personal affairs of his householder disciples. He didn't ask, how often are you having sex or something. Anyway, one thing is that Grhasthas, they should have children, otherwise what's the purpose of getting married? That they should, of course, if either the husband or the wife is impotent, then they can't have children. But otherwise, if they're both healthy, then they should have children. Actually, in the Vedic literature, there's a whole science of how to have sex life so you can have good children, which Prabhupada mentions in his purports, but he doesn't describe. So Prabhupada just kept it at that simple thing, 50 rounds. So anyway, to have children means sex is required, but there should be no contraceptives or no abortion. That is very simple. All these things are sinful. Divorce is sinful, contraceptives are sinful, abortion is sinful. Using contraceptives is also very, very sinful, because sex means that some jiva is supposed to be given a chance to take birth. But if that opportunity is denied, then that is very simple. Plus, it's also sinful because one is engaging in sense gratification without taking any responsibility. Right. So, although Prabhupada, he preferred his Grhastha disciples not to have many, Prabhupada preferred that his Grhastha disciples not have many children. He wanted them to overcome the sexual attraction. But if you're not overcoming the sexual attraction very quickly, don't use contraceptives or abortion or anything like this. Better to have many children. Better have many children and train them in Krishna consciousness. So then the next question is, well, that's all right, but how to overcome the lust? Prabhupada wrote in one letter that if a man can live with a beautiful and obliging wife, and still not enjoy her, then he is better than a brahmachari. So how to be so strong in Grihastha life? That means a very strong sense of Krishna consciousness is needed. One should be very strong in Krishna consciousness, Chant very clearly and nicely. Engage the family members in Krishna consciousness, especially deity worship at home is recommended. Or as Harikesh Maharaj was saying last night, if you're living close to the temple, you come and worship the deities in the temple.
Come and worship deities in the temple. And the whole attitude should be of the husband that he wants to engage all the family members in Krishna's service. So if husband and wife agree to live together for the sake of serving Krishna, then they can overcome this lust. It's easy to say it may not be very easy to put it into practice. But that is the only solution. So tomorrow we'll continue more discussion about practicing Krishna consciousness at home. What is the role of the husband? What is the role of the wife? How one should eventually become renounced from Grhastha life, and problems in family life. So we'll finish that. Thank you for patiently listening.